In a quiet little neighborhood where everyone knew each other, at least by face if not by name, there was one person who took immense pride in her home. Her front yard wasn't just grass. It was her sanctuary. Every morning she'd step outside, with a cup of tea in hand, admiring how perfectly green the lawn looked under the sun. She spent weekends trimming edges, planting flowers, and making sure everything stayed neat and tidy. It wasn't about showing off, though some might have thought so. To her, it was personal. That patch of land represented hard work, patience, and a small slice of happiness. One sunny Saturday afternoon, after running errands at the grocery store, she pulled into her driveway expecting to see the same familiar sight: the vibrant blooms, the freshly cut grass, and the peaceful vibe that always greeted her when she came home. But this time something felt off. As she parked and stepped out of her car, her heart sank. Right there, smack in the middle of her beloved lawn, was a car. Not hers, someone else's. It wasn't just casually parked either. It looked like whoever drove it hadn't even bothered to aim for the driveway. The tires had left deep impressions on the soft earth, crushing the carefully nurtured grass beneath them. A few petals from her newly planted petunias were scattered around, as if they'd been trampled without a second thought. For a moment, she stood frozen, staring at the scene before her. Who could do this? And why? Her first instinct was to check whose car it was. Maybe it belonged to someone visiting another neighbor, but no, none of her immediate neighbors seemed to match the vehicle sitting on her lawn. Then it hit her. It had to be him. The guy 2 doors down. He was known for cutting corners, whether it was parking wherever he pleased or ignoring basic courtesy. Sure enough, when she glanced toward his house, she spotted him lounging on his porch, scrolling through his phone like nothing unusual was happening. Fuming but trying to keep her cool, she walked over to confront him. "Excuse me," she said, firmly, standing near his gate. When he finally looked up, his expression didn't change much. Instead of apologizing or offering an explanation, he gave her a shrug. "Oh yeah," he replied casually, almost dismissively. "I was running late for a meeting, so I figured your lawn would do." She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "You figured my lawn would do?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to stay calm. "Do you realize what you've done? You've ruined weeks of work." He waved a hand as if swatting away her concern. "Relax, it's just grass, it'll grow back." His tone made it sound like her frustration was completely unreasonable, like all she needed to do was take a deep breath and move on. But she couldn't move on. Not yet. This wasn't just about the grass. It was about respect. Respect for her property, for her effort, and for the rules everyone agreed to follow when they moved into the neighborhood. There were clear guidelines set by the Homeowners Association, HOA, which explicitly stated that cars shouldn't be parked anywhere except driveways or designated areas. What he'd done wasn't just careless. It was a violation. Still, she tried reasoning with him. "Look," she said, lowering her voice to sound less confrontational, "we have rules here for a reason. If we don't stick to them, things will get chaotic. Can you please promise not to do this again?" Instead of agreeing, he rolled his eyes. "Come on, don't be such a stickler. Everyone bends the rules sometimes. Besides, it's not like anyone got hurt." That comment stung more than she expected. Maybe because it revealed how little he cared. Not just about her feelings, but also about the community as a whole. Rules weren't meant to make life harder. They existed to create harmony. By breaking them, he wasn't just inconveniencing her. He was setting a bad example for others. When it became clear that talking wouldn't solve anything, she decided to take matters into her own hands. She went back home, snapped pictures of the damage, and drafted a polite but firm letter reminding him of the HOA regulations. She dropped it off at his doorstep later that evening, hoping it would make him think twice next time. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a much bigger battle. The letter was simple and to the point. It wasn't written to provoke or accuse. It was a calm reminder of the rules everyone in the neighborhood had agreed to follow. The tone was polite, almost friendly, but firm enough to make it clear that what happened wasn't okay. After dropping it off at her neighbor's house, she felt a small sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, he'd read it and realize how serious she was about keeping things orderly. Maybe he'd apologize and promise not to repeat his mistake. But deep down, she knew better. Something about him, the way he shrugged off her concerns earlier, told her this wouldn't end quietly. And sure enough, a day later, she found his response tucked under her door. It wasn't handwritten like hers had been. Instead, it was typed out, short and blunt. He didn't even bother addressing her by name. The note read, "I don't have time for this drama, it's just grass, get over it." She read it twice, then set it down on the kitchen counter, exhaling slowly. Her first instinct was to march, right back over to his house and demand an explanation face to face. How could someone be so dismissive? But she stopped herself. Arguing with him directly hadn't worked before, and there was no reason to believe it would now. She needed a different approach, one that involved more than just the two of them. That's when she decided to take the matter to the HOA board. They existed for situations exactly like this, didn't they? To enforce the rules and ensure everyone played fair. So, armed with photos of her damaged lawn and a copy of the rulebook highlighting the parking restrictions, she attended the next meeting. She explained everything calmly, showing the board members the evidence and sharing how her attempts to resolve the issue peacefully had failed. At first, some of the board members seemed hesitant. They asked questions like, "Are you sure it's worth escalating?" Or, "Do you think talking to him again might help?" But when they saw the pictures, the crushed grass, the tire marks, the scattered flower petals, they understood. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a blatant disregard for both her property and the community's guidelines. The board agreed to send him a formal warning. It wasn't a punishment exactly, but it was a step toward making it clear that his actions couldn't go unchecked. The letter informed him that any future violations would result in fines and, if necessary, towing. When the board handed her the document to review before sending it, she felt hopeful. Maybe this would finally get through to him. But hope can be a fragile thing. A few days after the warning was delivered, she spotted him outside washing his car. Normally, this wouldn't mean much, but the smug look on his face told her everything she needed to know. As she walked past, pretending not to notice, he called out to her. "Hey," he said, leaning against his car with a smirk. "Got your little letter. Don't worry, I'll keep my eyes peeled for rogue patches of grass." His sarcasm stung, but she forced herself to smile politely. "Just following the rules," she replied evenly. "We all agreed to them when we moved in." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Rules, schmules. You're taking this way too seriously." Then, without waiting for a response, he turned back to his car, whistling as though nothing was wrong. It was infuriating, yes, but also telling. He wasn't just ignoring the rules, he was mocking them. Worse, he seemed to think she was the problem, not his behavior. That realization weighed heavily on her. What kind of person could act so entitled, so indifferent to the impact of their actions? Did he really believe the world revolved around him? Still, she refused to let his attitude get the best of her. Instead, she focused on staying vigilant. If he crossed the line again, she'd be ready. She started keeping a closer eye on her property, checking her lawn every morning and evening. She even jotted down notes whenever she noticed something unusual. A car parked suspiciously close to her driveway, footprints in the flower beds, anything that seemed out of place. At night, she left her porch light on, hoping it might deter him from trying anything sneaky. Her neighbors began to notice her efforts. Some offered words of encouragement, telling her she was doing the right thing by standing up for herself. Others weren't so supportive. One woman who lived across the street stopped her one afternoon while she was watering her plants. "You know," the woman said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, "you might want to ease up a bit. People are starting to talk." "Talk about what?" she asked, genuinely confused. "Well, The woman hesitated, glancing around as if worried someone might overhear. Some folks think you're being a little intense. About the grass, I mean. It's not like anyone died. For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. Was she really coming across as unreasonable? She thought about all the hours she'd spent tending to her yard, all the care she put into making it beautiful, not just for herself, but for the neighborhood. Didn't that count for something? "I'm not doing this because I'm obsessed with my lawn," she finally said, choosing her words carefully. "I'm doing it because we have rules for a reason. If we don't stick to them, things fall apart. Isn't that why we joined this community in the first place?" The woman shrugged, clearly uncomfortable. "I guess. Just try not to rub people the wrong way, okay?" As she watched the woman walk away, she couldn't help but feel a pang of doubt. Was she pushing too hard? Making too big a deal out of something small? But then she remembered the damage to her lawn, the dismissive comments, the outright refusal to respect boundaries. No, she decided. Standing up for what's right isn't easy, but it's still the right thing to do. Little did she know her resolve would soon be put to the test in ways she never imagined. It had been a couple of weeks since the HOA sent out the warning letter, and for a while things seemed quieter. The lawn healed slowly. New blades of grass began to peek through the flattened patches, and the flower beds regained their vibrancy. Life returned to its usual rhythm. Early mornings were peaceful again, with birds chirping and the soft hum of sprinklers watering nearby yards. She started to relax, thinking maybe the whole ordeal was behind her. Maybe the warning had done its job. But then, one crisp Friday morning, she woke up earlier than usual. Sleep hadn't come easily the night before, so she decided to make the most of it by getting an early start on her day. With a steaming cup of coffee in hand, she stepped outside to enjoy the quiet. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. For a moment, everything felt perfect. And then she saw it. Right there, smack in the middle of her lawn, was that car again. Same color, same model, same audacity. Her stomach dropped as she took in the sight. This time it wasn't just parked haphazardly. It looked like he'd driven straight over her newly planted petunias. The vibrant purple blooms lay crushed under the tires, their stems snapped and scattered like confetti. Her heart raced as anger bubbled up inside her. How could he do this? Again? She stormed over to his house, her bare feet crunching against the gravel path leading to his porch. He was already awake, sitting outside with a mug of coffee, scrolling through his phone. When he noticed her approaching, he glanced up lazily, almost as if he'd been expecting her. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded, her voice shaking with frustration. "I thought we were clear about this. You can't just park wherever you want." He leaned back in his chair, completely unfazed. "Relax," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "It's not a big deal. I needed a place to leave my car for a few hours. Yours happened to be convenient." "Convenient?" she repeated, incredulous. "You think destroying someone else's property is convenient?" "Oh, come on," he shot back, rolling his eyes. "You're acting like I bulldozed your house or something. It's just grass and flowers. They'll grow back." Her fists clenched at her sides. "That's not the point," she snapped. "The point is, you don't get to ignore the rules whenever it suits you. Do you even care about anyone but yourself?" He smirked, setting his mug down. "Look, I don't have time for this drama. Go ahead and complain to the HOA again if it makes you feel better. See if I care." That was the final straw. Something inside her snapped. She realized that no amount of talking, pleading, or reasoning would change his mind. He didn't respect her, her property, or the community's guidelines, and he never would. So instead of wasting another breath arguing with him, she turned around and marched back to her house. Once inside, she grabbed her phone and dialed the local non-emergency number. Her hands trembled slightly as she explained the situation to the dispatcher. An unauthorized vehicle parked on private property causing damage. She provided her address and described the car in detail. Within 20 minutes, a tow truck arrived. She watched from her window as the driver hooked up the vehicle, lifting it off her lawn with practiced ease. Neighbors who were starting their mornings stopped to gawk, whispering among themselves. Some nodded approvingly when they realized what was happening. Others looked confused or annoyed. But she didn't care about any of that. All she cared about was finally putting an end to this nonsense. When the culprit realized what was going on, his reaction was explosive. He came charging out of his house, yelling loud enough for half the neighborhood to hear. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted at the tow truck driver, waving his arms wildly. "That's my car, put it down." The driver ignored him, calmly continuing his work. Meanwhile, she stepped onto her porch, crossing her arms as she watched the scene unfold. When he spotted her, his fury doubled. "You did this," he accused, pointing a finger at her. "You called them, didn't you? Who do you think you are?" "I'm someone who follows the rules," she replied evenly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Your car was parked illegally on my property. I gave you plenty of chances to fix this peacefully, but you chose to ignore them. Now you'll have to deal with the consequences." His face turned red with rage. "This isn't over," he spat. "You'll regret this. Mark my words." She didn't respond. There was no point. Instead, she stood there silently as the tow truck drove away, leaving him standing in the middle of the street fuming. A strange sense of satisfaction washed over her, not because she enjoyed seeing him angry, but because she knew she'd done the right thing. For once, justice had been served. But as the adrenaline faded and reality set in, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly the end. His parting threat echoed in her mind. "You'll regret this." What did he mean by that? Would he retaliate somehow? Or was it just empty bluster meant to scare her? Over the next few days, tension in the neighborhood reached an all-time high. Whispers spread like wildfire, with everyone speculating about what had happened. Some neighbors praised her for standing her ground, saying it was about time someone put him in his place. Others sided with him, calling her actions extreme and unnecessary. One man even stopped her in the grocery store parking lot to say, "Don't you think towing his car was a bit much?" "It wasn't personal," she explained patiently. "He broke the rules repeatedly. I tried being reasonable, but he refused to listen. At some point, you have to draw a line." The man shrugged, clearly unconvinced. "Still, you gotta admit it's gonna cause problems." And he wasn't wrong. As the days went by, she noticed subtle changes in how people treated her. Smiles became rarer, conversations shorter. Even her closest neighbors seemed hesitant to engage with her, as though fearing they'd be dragged into the conflict. It was isolating, to say the least. Meanwhile, the man whose car had been towed was nowhere to be seen. His garage remained closed and his driveway empty. Rumors swirled that he was planning some sort of revenge, though no one knew exactly what form it might take. Every creak of her front gate or unfamiliar sound outside made her jump. Was he watching her? Waiting for the right moment to strike back? Despite the unease, she refused to let fear dictate her life. She continued tending to her garden, watering her plants and keeping her home tidy. If anything, she worked harder than ever, determined to show that she wouldn't be intimidated. But deep down, she couldn't help wondering, had she gone too far? Was standing up for herself worth the cost of peace in her own neighborhood? Only time would tell. The tension in the neighborhood didn't fade with time. If anything, it grew thicker, like a storm cloud hovering overhead, casting its shadow over everyone. People whispered behind closed doors and exchanged loaded glances whenever they passed each other on the street. The incident with the towed car had become the talk of the block, dividing opinions and stirring up emotions that had long been buried beneath polite smiles and small talk. Some neighbors rallied around her, praising her for standing up to someone who clearly thought he was above the rules. They admired her courage, saying she'd done what many wanted to do but didn't have the guts to try. "Good for you," one older woman said when she bumped into her at the mailbox. "We can't let people walk all over us just because they feel entitled." But not everyone felt the same way. Others accused her of being too harsh, too rigid. "It's just grass," one man muttered when she walked by during his morning jog. Another neighbor, a young mom who often pushed her stroller past her house, stopped short one afternoon and said bluntly, "You're making things awkward for everyone. Can't you just let it go?" Her heart sank hearing those words, not because they surprised her, she'd expected some backlash, but because they made her question whether she'd misjudged the situation. Was she really the problem here? She replayed the events in her mind. The crushed flowers, the tire marks, the dismissive attitude, the outright refusal to follow basic guidelines. No matter how she looked at it, she couldn't see where she'd gone wrong. She wasn't asking for perfection. She was simply asking for respect. As the days turned into weeks, the HOA decided to hold an emergency meeting to address the growing divide. Flyers appeared on doorsteps across the neighborhood, urging residents to attend. The message was clear. This wasn't just about one person's lawn anymore. It was about the future of their community. Would they continue to enforce the rules, or would they let chaos creep in? On the night of the meeting, the community center was packed. People filed in quietly, choosing seats carefully as if trying to avoid taking sides too visibly. She arrived early, sitting near the front with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her pulse quickened as more chairs filled up, the room buzzing with low murmurs. When the man whose car had been towed walked in, late as usual, the atmosphere shifted. Heads turned, and conversations trailed off. He took a seat near the back, arms crossed, glaring daggers at anyone who dared meet his gaze. The HOA president called the meeting to order, clearing her throat nervously before launching into an explanation of why they were gathered. "We've heard concerns from multiple residents about recent events," she began, glancing briefly in both their directions. "Our goal tonight is to discuss these issues openly and come to a resolution that works for everyone." Then came the floor for discussion, and that's when things got heated. He spoke first, jumping to his feet with barely contained fury. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, pacing in front of the crowd. "She's making a mountain out of a molehill." "Yeah, I parked on her lawn. Big deal. It's not like I burned her house down. And now she's dragging me through the mud, costing me money, embarrassing me in front of everyone. Where does it end?" His voice echoed through the room, dripping with indignation. Some people nodded along sympathetically while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. When he finally sat down, red-faced and breathing heavily, the HOA president turned to her. "Would you like to respond?" She stood slowly, feeling every pair of eyes in the room lock onto her. For a moment she hesitated, unsure where to start. But then she took a deep breath and spoke from the heart. "I understand that mistakes happen," she began, keeping her tone steady. "If he'd accidentally driven onto my lawn once, apologized and promised not to do it again, I wouldn't be standing here today. But that's not what happened. He ignored the rules, dismissed my concerns, and laughed off the warning from the HOA. Even after all that, he did it again, on purpose. This isn't about revenge or drama. It's about accountability." Her words hung in the air, met with a mix of nods and skeptical stares. Then another neighbor chimed in, a middle-aged man who lived a few houses down. "I get both sides," he said diplomatically. "But we have rules for a reason. If we don't stick to them, what's stopping someone else from doing whatever they want? Next thing you know, people are throwing trash in our yards or blasting music at midnight." Others joined the conversation, sharing their thoughts. Some argued that towing his car was excessive, while others insisted it was necessary to send a message. Emotions ran high, voices rose, and tempers flared. At one point, a heated argument broke out between two neighbors who rarely spoke to each other outside of passing hellos. The HOA president struggled to maintain order, repeatedly calling for calm as the debate spiraled further out of control. Finally, after nearly 2 hours of back and forth, a decision was reached. By a narrow majority, the board upheld its original ruling. He would be fined for repeated violations, and any future offenses would result in immediate towing without warning. Additionally, the HOA refused to intervene regarding the impoundment of his vehicle, stating that it was a private matter between him and the towing company. When the verdict was announced, he erupted. "This is garbage," he yelled, slamming his fist against the table. "You're all siding with her because she plays the victim so well. Fine, do what you want. But don't expect me to forget this. With that, he stormed out of the room, leaving behind a stunned silence. The rest of the meeting wrapped up quickly, with the HOA president urging everyone to focus on moving forward and rebuilding harmony within the neighborhood. But as people trickled out of the community center, the weight of what had transpired lingered in the air. For her part, she felt drained but relieved. Justice had been served, at least officially, but she knew the real battle was far from over. As she walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, she couldn't shake the image of his furious face as he left the meeting. His parting words echoed in her mind. "Don't expect me to forget this." What did he mean? Would he lash out in some way? Or was it just empty anger, destined to fizzle out over time? Over the next few days, she kept a close eye on her surroundings. Every creak of the floorboards inside her house, every rustle of leaves outside made her nerves tingle. She started double-checking locks and keeping her phone nearby, just in case. Neighbors who had supported her began checking in, offering reassurance. "He'll cool off eventually," one woman told her. "Just give it time." But cooling off wasn't exactly his style. Instead, he seemed to channel his frustration into subtle acts of defiance. One morning, she found a pile of trash bags dumped near her mailbox. Another day, a loud truck roared past her house at dawn, blaring music that rattled her windows. None of it could be directly traced back to him, but the timing was suspicious enough to raise eyebrows. Still, she refused to let fear dictate her life. She continued watering her plants, trimming her hedges, and maintaining the beauty of her yard, not just for herself, but as a quiet act of resistance. If he wanted to intimidate her, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Yet, deep down, she wondered, how far was he willing to go? And how much longer could she hold her ground before the strain became too much to bear? The tension in the neighborhood didn't dissipate overnight. If anything, it simmered beneath the surface like a pot left on low heat, threatening to boil over at any moment. The man whose car had been towed seemed determined to make life as difficult as possible for her. His small acts of defiance, dumping trash near her mailbox, revving his engine loudly outside her house early in the morning, were petty but effective. They chipped away at her peace of mind, leaving her constantly on edge. But she refused to let him win. Every time he tried to rattle her, she responded with calm determination. She cleaned up the trash without complaint, reported the noise disturbances when necessary, and continued tending to her yard with unwavering dedication. Her resilience became a quiet rebellion against his attempts to intimidate her. Still, the strain began to show. Sleepless nights piled up, and the isolation from neighbors, who avoided taking sides, weighed heavily on her. For the first time, she questioned whether standing her ground was worth the cost. Then, one crisp Saturday morning, something unexpected happened. As she stepped outside to water her plants, she noticed a group of neighbors gathered near her driveway. At first, she thought they were there to confront her about the ongoing drama, but instead of accusations, she was met with smiles and offers of help. "We figured you could use a hand," said one woman, holding a pair of gardening gloves. Behind her stood several others armed with shovels, rakes, and bags of fresh soil. "Your lawn's looking great, but those petunias still need some love." She blinked in disbelief, overwhelmed by the gesture. These were the same people who had whispered behind her back, criticized her actions, or stayed silent when tensions ran high. Yet here they were, ready to pitch in, not out of obligation, but because they cared about the neighborhood. For hours, they worked together, planting new flowers, filling in bare patches of grass, and tidying up the edges of her yard. Conversations flowed naturally as they labored side by side, laughter replacing the awkward silences that had lingered for weeks. Someone brought out lemonade and cookies, turning the cleanup into an impromptu gathering. It was a simple act of kindness, but it meant more than words could express. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the freshly restored yard, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Maybe the conflict hadn't torn the community apart after all. Maybe it had reminded everyone what truly mattered. Working together, respecting shared spaces, and finding common ground even in disagreement. Meanwhile, the man across the street grew increasingly isolated. His behavior hadn't gone unnoticed by the rest of the neighborhood. While some had initially sympathized with him, his refusal to take responsibility and his ongoing efforts to stir up trouble wore thin. People stopped inviting him to block parties, ignored his complaints during HOA meetings, and avoided engaging with his antics altogether. He retaliated by becoming louder, angrier, and more disruptive, but it only pushed people further away. One day, a moving truck pulled up in front of his house. Neighbors paused mid-conversation to watch as boxes were loaded and furniture carted away. No announcement was made, no explanation given. He simply packed up and left, slipping out of the neighborhood as quietly as he'd once mocked its rules. Some speculated that the mounting pressure had finally gotten to him. Others guessed he'd decided to cut his losses and move somewhere less strict. Whatever the reason, his departure marked a turning point. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the neighborhood shifted dramatically. Without the constant tension hanging over them, residents began reconnecting. Front porches saw more activity, driveways became places where kids played basketball again, and casual chats over fences turned into deeper conversations. The divide that had formed between supporters and critics of her decision slowly healed, replaced by a collective understanding of why boundaries mattered. For her part, she learned valuable lessons from the ordeal. Standing up for herself wasn't easy. It came with risks, backlash, and moments of doubt, but it also strengthened her resolve. She realized that while fairness and respect couldn't always be enforced through arguments alone, they could be upheld through consistency and courage. And in doing so, she inspired others to reflect on their own roles within the community. Her lawn, once a battleground, now stood as a symbol of resilience and renewal. The crushed petunias had been replaced with vibrant blooms, and the tire marks were long gone, covered by lush green grass. When she sat on her porch in the evening, sipping tea and watching the sunset, she felt a deep sense of pride. Not just in her home, but in the neighborhood that had come together despite everything. Of course, life wasn't perfect. There would always be disagreements, misunderstandings, and challenges to face. But this experience taught everyone that conflict, handled with patience and unity, could lead to growth. Rules weren't meant to create division. They were designed to foster harmony. And sometimes, standing up for what's right, even when it feels lonely, can spark meaningful change. As she looked out at her thriving garden one last time before heading inside, she smiled softly. The battle may have been hard-fought, but the victory was sweeter than she ever imagined.